Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Career Pathways webinar series, Career Pathways, Leveraging CTE to Enhance Learning for All Students. Today's webinar is part one of our series and is focused on engaging key stakeholders to lead and inform career pathways. My name is Ellen Cushing, and I'm the Deputy Director of the College and Career Readiness and Success Center. The CCRS Center is a federally funded content center focused on supporting state education agencies in the design, implementation, and revision of key college and career readiness initiatives. One way that we support SEAs in their work is through targeted and intensive technical assistance support. And our technical assistance stems from key needs in the field, and this webinar series is intended to highlight one of the key emerging areas around developing high-quality career pathways programs that align both academic learning and career readiness skills. This webinar series is divided into three distinct yet critical aspects of developing a high-quality career pathways program. Today's webinar is focused on authentically engaging key stakeholders in the design process. Our second webinar, which will take place on Tuesday, July 19th, will focus on understanding the state context to inform the career pathways design, and we'll really focus on understanding local practices and labor market needs. Our third webinar, which will be on Monday, July 25th, will focus on creating coherence with career pathways, which will ensure that career pathways are part of larger college and career readiness efforts, and that career pathways promote coherence across other college and career readiness policies and initiatives. Today's webinar objectives are threefold. The first is to define authentic stakeholder engagement and its role in career pathways. The second is to learn how Ohio has promoted stakeholder engagement in their career pathways programs. And the third is to share available resources that can be used to promote authentic stakeholder engagement in your local context. Before I introduce today's presenters, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how you can engage with us both during the webinar and after. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you should have a chat box function. Feel free to enter any questions or comments that you might have for presenters in the chat box throughout the webinar. You can also use the raise hand function, which is also part of your platform on the right-hand side. If you want to ask a question via your phone, just simply raise your hand and we can unmute your line and you can ask your question to the presenters. We also have opportunities for you to engage with us after this webinar. The first is through a post-event feedback survey that we're hoping you can fill out before the end of today's webinar. And this will help us both understand your experience on the webinar as well as any areas of interest related to career pathways or college and career readiness. And then finally, we'll be sharing a recorded version of our webinar on our website. It should be up there in a couple of days. And when you, if you want to see the webinar or access us after the webinar, you can go through that link and connect with us as well. So now I have the opportunity to introduce today's presenters. Our first presenter is Dr. Cheney Mosley, who is a senior content expert with the College and Career Readiness and Success Center. Prior to joining the CCRS Center, Dr. Mosley served as the CTE Director of Nashville Public Schools, where he provided leadership for 41 career academies across 15 high schools. Dr. Mosley is also a National Board Certified teacher and has taught at the high school, undergraduate, and graduate levels. Our second presenter is Dr. Emily Pashas. Dr. Pashas joined the Ohio Department of Education in 2012 and served as the Data and Accountability Lead for the Career and Technical Education, as well as the Assistant Director in the Office of Accountability. In 2016, Dr. Pashas was named the Director of Career and Technical Education and has led the development and implementation of the nation's first A through F CTE report card, as well as the development of Ohio's career-focused pathway to high school graduation. Dr. Pashas also leads the department's industry credentialed initiative, ensuring that students earn high-demand credentials. Dr. Pashas is also a fellow with the Strategic Data Project through the Center for Education Policy Research at Harvard University. And our third presenter is Catherine Jacques, who is a technical assistance lead with the center as well. Through this work, Catherine supports SEAs and LEAs in the implementation of key college and career readiness initiatives. And prior to joining the CCRS Center, Catherine worked on education research studies for the District of Columbia as well as the University of Michigan. And with that, I'd like to open it up to our first polling question, as well as our first presenter, Dr. Cheney Mosley.
So we'll take a few more seconds before we show the results to make sure that everyone has responded to this question in the current context in which we're working. Five seconds. And let's go ahead and close that poll and take a look at the results. So we see from those that are active on the webinar, 19% think or feel that stakeholder engagement is important to career pathway development and execution so that we can connect students to the industry and let that inform our career guidance. 31% of us feel that stakeholder engagement ensures that our pathways are aligned with the needs of the workforce. 3% feel that it's important that to have stakeholders engaged so that we can align pathways with the post-secondary education opportunities. And the majority of us, 47%, indicate that stakeholder engagement is important so that we can have a shared ownership of education and workforce development. So it's interesting seeing where we all come from. We each have worked in a different context and we have different perspectives. Good afternoon. I'm Cheney, as Ellen said, and she told a bit about my background. I'm excited to share with you some more information that we've learned about career pathways and some of my background in engaging stakeholders. When I worked at the State Department of Education and in Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools, we used stakeholders for a variety of reasons, and all the four options that we just examined are all reasons that stakeholder engagement is important. So as we look at the current slide, we see three different acts that all of us are probably quite familiar with: the Every Student Succeeds Act, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and finally the Carl Perkins Act. When we think about the importance of stakeholder engagement, we may be asking ourselves, not only why is it important, but why is it important now? And it's an interesting question, but there's been a lot happening at the federal level emphasizing the role that stakeholders can play in building out career pathways. So let's start with the Every Student Succeeds Act. What we know is the definition of a well-rounded education in the Every Student Succeeds Act includes career and technical education, which are certainly a part of career pathways. We also know that ESSA indicates that academic standards must be aligned with career and technical education standards as well. And the ESSA Act provides multiple opportunities for funding career pathways initiatives, career guidance, career preparation, and career exploration opportunities for students. So when we dig into ESSA, we know there is quite a bit of emphasis on career education and career pathway development. Moving on to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, we know that it's important that career pathways supported by this act lead to the earning of a post-secondary credential. And that could be a professional industry certification, but it could also be a 2- or a 4-year degree as well, so a variety of options there. And then looking at the Carl Perkins Act, we know that career and technical education programs supported by Carl Perkins are expected to have an advisory board, which is comprised of industry stakeholders as well as parents and community members. Career and tech ed programs should be aligned with the workforce needs and opportunities for students, and the stakeholders should be engaged in career and technical education program development, program improvement, and also program planning. So from a federal level, stakeholder engagement is very important when it comes to building out career pathways. So when we think about stakeholder engagement and why it's important, here are 5 examples of what that means, right? So we know that successful career pathways are implemented through partnerships with stakeholders. So we don't build out career pathways in silos or silos of education. The research also tells us that instruction in school that has value beyond school is informed by and requires community input. So right there we have 2 explicit reasons why stakeholder engagement is important. But we also know that stakeholder engagement leads to enhanced governance and accountability for results. Engagement provides external public relations and marketing for initiatives, and I think we're going to hear we'll hear a little bit more about that later on. And stakeholder engagement allows for collaborative decisions to be made, and it increases support for our programs and sustainment for our programs. And so when we're thinking about the stakeholders with whom we're engaging, we're thinking about a variety of people: parents, community organizations, interested community members, certainly local and regional business and industry, post-secondary education, including technical colleges, 2- and 4-year universities, but also training programs that are preparing students to meet the needs of the workforce. And so it's not an easy thing to identify the 1 or 2 people that should be engaged in when thinking about stakeholder engagement and building out career pathways. But why? So we understand a little bit about the importance of it, but what are the results of career pathways when we really engage stakeholders? What can we anticipate? And I'm sure that many of us are engaging stakeholders, and some of us are probably stakeholders for career pathways that are currently being built out. One of the best things that comes from stakeholder engagement is a shared vision. And that was one of the options on the first poll that we took. And I believe that maybe the majority of the respondents indicated that one of the most important reasons to have stakeholder engagement was so that we had shared ownership in the education of our youth and shared ownership in workforce development. But that doesn't happen without a shared vision. And we create that when we work with our stakeholders to develop our vision for career pathways. That's exactly what we get. We can also think about the collective impact that occurs when we have stakeholder engagement. So building out career pathways, one of the advantages of engaging stakeholders such as business or industry is possibly the opportunity to provide real-world learning opportunities or experiences for students that are in career pathways. And that's important because it helps students identify not only what they enjoy, but also what they don't enjoy. But will we have that sort of impact if we didn't engage our stakeholders? We also know that change is not easy, and having stakeholders involved with building out career pathways allows us to have a champion for some of our initiatives. In my previous role working with Nashville schools, we had a group of stakeholders that we called the CEO champions. This was a group of chief executive officers from a variety of businesses and organizations around the city of Nashville, and it was co-chaired by our superintendent of schools and the mayor of Nashville. The purpose of the CEO champions was to support the shared vision for the career pathways that had been built out and help communicate the message to the entire community about the value and importance of career pathways. We also think about the connection that stakeholders give us with the resources that they have. So if we're providing career pathway opportunities for students, we know that keeping up with the most modern equipment and technology can be quite expensive. But some of our stakeholders may have more access to equipment that could be loaned to a school or loaned to an education institution, so that students could be learning on equipment, for example, that is relevant to the modern industry and it's not outdated. It could also be, when we talk about resources, that businesses are providing opportunities for students to explore jobs through industry-specific field trips or job shadows. Other resources might be sending employees to a school as a guest speaker to help students understand the educational requirements for specific careers. So those resources are critical to successful career pathways. And another important aspect is the insight and the advice that comes from it. Our stakeholders are the ones that are working on the ground, right? When we think about career pathways, we have to have those that are interested in preparing their future workforce. Without the insight that comes from those types of stakeholders, how can we ensure that the information that we are providing to students is relevant to the needs of the modern industry? How can we ensure that the programs that we are providing for students are actually aligned to meet the needs of the workforce? How can we ensure that our instructional shifts or the projects that we have our students working on mimic real-world experiences? And the answer is we can't, not without stakeholder engagement. So I think that's pretty important. We definitely need their insight. We need their advice. And what I've always found to be one of the biggest advantages, one of the outcomes of high-quality stakeholder engagement, was increased accountability. I know many organizations build out a strategic plan with goals and objectives and timelines by which they will be met. But when we engage our stakeholders, they help us hold ourselves accountable for carrying out that strategic plan and working towards accomplishing those goals that we've set for ourselves. And so I think that's important for any organization, but especially when it comes to career pathways. So what does it look like? What is authentic stakeholder engagement? We've identified already that there are multiple types of stakeholders when it comes to building out career pathways. But what we know is that it is critical that we assemble the right team. We don't operate just in silos, and we can't have representatives only from one industry. We need a variety of representatives coming to the table. And once we've assembled the right team, it's critical that we have clear, identified roles and responsibilities for each person sitting around that table when we are discussing career pathways. What we know is that when engaging stakeholders, if someone attends a meeting or volunteers to participate in an activity, shows up and doesn't understand the role that he or she plays, the likelihood that that stakeholder will continue to be engaged is decreased. And so this second bullet point is very important. We know that we engage with our stakeholders through outreach and communication, and that it must occur often, it must be frequent, and it must be clear and concise. From my experiences working with industry stakeholders, what I know is that education does not always operate the same way as business. For example, I remember being in a meeting with one stakeholder and referencing the importance of PTO. And she laughed and like, oh yeah, everybody loves PTO. And I was surprised to learn that our stakeholders were excited about parent-teacher organizations. It was only a few minutes later when we quickly realized she was talking about paid time off, which those of you working in public education know that paid time off doesn't necessarily occur for teachers just like that. But it's that type of communication that is required when we have the authentic stakeholder engagement and the frequent outreach. Having a point of contact available that stakeholders can reach is critical when we're building out and engaging in career pathways. These are folks who are volunteering their time to work with us, and they deserve and want someone who can and will be responsive to meet their needs. Let's look at that fourth bullet, which is sharing beliefs and designing goals. Organizationally, we know that each organization has goals that they set, but when we invite stakeholders to the table, that means that we're giving those individuals a voice and helping craft our goals. But before we even get to that part, it's important to have a really intense conversation about the beliefs around career pathways. You know, we started this conversation here with a poll about why the most important reasons that we should engage stakeholders in the first place. And we saw from the group on this webinar that we have different perspectives on that. And so I think we have to acknowledge the same thing when we are engaging with stakeholders and have a discussion and articulating our belief statement so that we are on the same page and we do have shared beliefs. And when it comes to designing goals, sometimes there's some negotiation that has to occur. We talked earlier about increased accountability being a benefit of stakeholder engagement, and it certainly is. But in my experiences, business and industry stakeholders have very high expectations. And when they write goals, they want those goals to be quantified, and they want to see demonstrable, demonstrable improvements or achievements from year to year to year, because that's what helps us improve. And so that's what authentic stakeholder engagement looks like. This fifth bullet, ensuring relevant participation, is also important to stakeholder engagement. It goes back to what we said earlier. When we're assembling the right team, we have to have clearly identified and clearly articulated roles and responsibilities for each stakeholder. And maybe it's a parent who's coming to a stakeholder meeting. But what role does that parent have? Maybe he or she doesn't understand the needs of the industry. And if the conversation is focused on the needs of the industry, does that individual feel like he or she has relevant participation? If not, what's the likelihood that he or she will come again? So we have to ensure that all stakeholders are participating in a way that is relevant to the context from which they come and aligned with the reasons that they were invited to that stakeholder discussion in the first place. And finally, stakeholder engagement is doing the work together. It's not stakeholders holding us accountable for meeting our goals. It's stakeholders acknowledging that we have shared beliefs and shared goals and asking the question, how can I help you meet your goals? These are the conversations, though, that have to happen when we're assembling our groups of stakeholders to build out and execute our high-quality career pathways. Because if we don't start those conversations, or if we don't have these conversations early on about the expectations of stakeholder engagement and those who are executing the plans, then I'm not sure that authentic stakeholder engagement is actually possible. It can be a little challenging. But that's my perspective. And I think at this point it might be more helpful to hear from Emily Pashas, the State CTE Director from Ohio, as she will share their approach to stakeholder engagement. Emily?
Thank you, Cheney. And thanks for inviting me to share what we're working on here in Ohio around stakeholder engagement. I loved that so many folks out on the webinar said that one of the main goals of stakeholder engagement is this concept of shared ownership. That's really what we're trying to get at here in Ohio. We want to make sure that our businesses, our community organizations, our parents, our teachers, our school administrators all feel like they have stake in the work that we're doing. And as Ohio has been working over this summer as part of our New Skills for Youth Grant Needs Assessment, we've been really thinking about who our stakeholders actually are. We've had a series of guiding questions that we have used to try to think about how we're going to engage our stakeholders. Who are they? Who are our stakeholders to begin with? We had quite a bit of conversation around who are the people that we need to be engaging. Who are the ones who might have perspectives out there that we aren't already talking to? Who are we missing in this conversation already? We decided that we really are thinking of our stakeholders as our communities in general, and our communities are made up of a number of different smaller groups that might have different interests in how our career pathway systems work for their particular needs. Those stakeholders are business and industry partners. Those stakeholders are parents, they're students, they're teachers, they're school administrators, they are community and charitable organizations who are working to better their community, they are economic development folks. We have a wide variety of people who have interest in us having a strong career pathway system in Ohio. So as we sort of felt the breadth of what we were trying to do, we have so many people that we want to engage and make sure we're getting feedback from so that they feel like they have a voice and a stake in the work that we're doing. Trying to think about reaching all of those people, particularly in a relatively short time frame, felt like a huge task, because it is a huge task. So as we were thinking about how to reach them, we also started thinking about, once we do get to them, what do we ask? What are the right questions? How do we figure out what we can do to get the best information back from the folks that were generously donating their time to share their feedback with us and help us improve our systems? And then once they do that, how do we decide how to analyze their feedback? How do we synthesize all of this rich information that we're hoping to get from the folks around the state of Ohio to help us improve our career pathway system? What we've decided to do here in Ohio is have a sort of multi-pronged approach to stakeholder engagement. We are doing a big push around focus groups, so we have folks out in the field doing in-depth interviews and focus groups with all of those stakeholder groups that I mentioned before. But anybody who's ever spent any time doing focus groups knows that they are incredibly time intensive, and you can't get to everyone you would like to get to with that type of research. We couldn't possibly sit down with every stakeholder in the state and spend the kind of time and energy with them that we'd like to be able to get their feedback and be able to integrate it into our system. So we knew we were going to want to do some sort of survey research. And with all of these different stakeholder groups that we're trying to hit, it felt like a huge undertaking to try to design a survey that would get the right information from the right stakeholders at the right time in a way that is respectful of their time and energy, that allows them to give us feedback without too much prompting on their part. And that's where we actually were very, very pleased to connect with the College and Career Readiness Success Center. And they actually have been a fantastic thought partner with us as we've been working on our survey. We've designed a survey with their support that engages all of these different stakeholders. So we have a section of this survey that hits school administrators, teachers, parents, students, community leaders and folks in community organizations, business and industry leaders. And the way that we were able to get that support and get that survey done in relatively short order is that the folks at the College and Career Readiness Success Center were able to pull together all of the resources that are already out there around engaging those types of stakeholders through survey research. So we didn't have to reinvent the wheel here. We were able to access surveys in other states and from other organizations who had done similar types of work, and then look at all of those holistically and decide which parts of this are going to work for our purposes here in Ohio, which of these questions are going to be applicable to our particular stakeholders, and design a survey that we feel is going to provide us a ton of rich information from a much, much broader swath of Ohioans than we would ever be able to get to by just going out my, my little merry band of career tech staff here in Ohio and sitting down and talking to folks. We're going to be able to hit a much broader swath of folks. And I'm actually really hoping to get a lot of responses from folks that we don't typically hear from. And in order to be able to get that sort of broad feedback, we've designed what we think is a pretty comprehensive marketing plan to get this survey out into the world to engage our stakeholders. One of the key pieces of getting this survey out into the world to a broad variety of people is that we have statewide support from our governor's office and from agencies around the state. This really is a cross-functional tool at this point. We're getting feedback from folks that we're going to be able to share with other agencies in Ohio. Our governor's office is incredibly supportive of this work. They actually have taken the survey, reviewed it themselves, provided feedback on some additional information that they would like to hear for their particular purposes. So this survey work that we're doing is going to provide Ohioans generally an opportunity to provide feedback not just to the Office of Career Technical Education at the Ohio Department of Education, but to folks who administer job and family services programs, to our folks who are working with all sorts of programs around the state designed to enhance workforce development. And we'll also be sharing our results directly with legislators and our governor's office. So this is a great opportunity that we're able to leverage right now to give Ohioans this opportunity to share information that is going to be widely used across the state. Because we have such broad support around the state from our state leaders and agencies, we're able to really work our networks. We all have sort of those groups of people that we know we can engage because we engage with them regularly. We're leveraging all of our networks around the state that all of our state leaders have. We're asking them to share this survey out with their folks and so on, to share it again out with their peer networks, so that we're hoping to get some sort of social network type effect going on here where we're able to engage as many stakeholders as possible that way. We're leveraging pre-existing meetings and conferences where we know folks are going to be gathered together, and gosh darn it, we're going to show up and talk to them. We have designed a slide with a QR code that if you click it with your or snap it with your cell phone will take you directly to our survey that is going to be inserted in every PowerPoint that anyone from the Ohio Department of Education presents between now and the end of our survey window, so that it's not just career tech going out and talking about this, but anytime one of our folks goes out and does a presentation to math teachers or to folks who are working with school improvement, all of these folks are going to have the opportunity to weigh in and provide feedback on our survey. We've also had an exceptionally great response to social media marketing. The Ohio Department of Education has leveraged Facebook and Twitter ads very successfully to get information out to people who aren't in the education community. So at the Department of Ed, it's relatively easy for us to get principals, superintendents, teachers, but it's sometimes harder for us to get to parents, and in particular, it's hard for us to get to students. So what we've been able to do in Ohio, when we have information we need to get to those people, we found Facebook ads to be incredibly effective. We have a dual enrollment program here in Ohio that is called College Credit Plus, and we want to get information about that directly to families. The department used a Facebook ad, and we're able to get 73,000 engagements from Ohioans with that ad who are getting information directly about this program through that marketing campaign. So we are set to launch a targeted marketing campaign to get our survey out into the world via social media, and we're hoping to get lots of responses from folks that we wouldn't typically be talking to on a day-to-day basis, particularly those parents, those students, and business leaders who may already be engaged with their schools locally and assisting to build and maintain pathways. And then the one thing that is great about having a sort of multi-pronged approach to this is that we're able to evaluate what's working and what's not as we go. So we're going to have this survey open for a number of weeks. We're going to be monitoring daily. Are we getting the engagement that we want from business people? Are we getting the engagement that we want from teachers, students, parents? And as we evaluate that, we are going to be shifting our focus throughout the survey window to make sure that we are putting additional efforts in engaging stakeholders that we're not getting as much feedback from, and maybe backing off the engagement with folks that we've gotten an overwhelming response from, so that we can ensure that by the time we're done with our survey window, we have a balanced set of responses from Ohioans, and that they've been able to provide information. We make sure we have stakeholder input from all of our key groups. I really appreciate the opportunity to share the work that we're doing in Ohio. With that, I think we're going to go to our polling question number 2.
Before we do that, Emily, can I ask you 2 quick questions that came up, please? It's Beth. One from Missy asked about, were students first on the list of stakeholders, and maybe a little bit of how you are engaging students. And the other one is from Kelly, and she was wondering if there's once you finalize the survey, will it be open to others to share?
Great questions. In terms of who was first on the list of stakeholders, we're not ranking here. We want to make sure that we're getting feedback from all of these different groups. Our survey is actually designed to try to understand how some of these groups are engaging with one another. So they do ask, for instance, we talk to teachers and school administrators about how they're engaging with businesses, what's working there, what would make it easier for them to engage with businesses, and vice versa. In terms of students, one of the things that we're asking students is about what sorts of activities their teachers are doing in the classroom every day that help them make real-world connections between their academic content and skills they might need in the workforce. So, when we're engaging students specifically, I also feel like we're getting information about the other stakeholder groups that we're interested in, and vice versa. So I wouldn't say that any particular group was first on the list as opposed to any other group, but we're really thinking about this as sort of holistically and trying to understand the connections between groups and what's working and where we need to sort of bolster our efforts and where we need to get out of our own way, where there are barriers in place that we can remove. But I'm actually very, very excited to see the student data, because that's the group that I actually have the least contact with on a day-to-day basis as someone in a state agency. We talk to educators quite regularly. We have lots of business partnerships, but we don't talk regularly to students. So I am excited to see those data. In terms of having the survey open for folks after we're done with this work, I'm happy to share what we've produced. I'm certainly happy to do that after we're done with this work.
I'm going to chime in.
You want to talk about stakeholders, and then I have one other quick question for Emily.
Sure, I'm just going to chime in real quick and add a little bit to what Emily said. What Ohio is, where they are right now, is conducting, I guess, a needs sensing, needs assessment, or synthesizing the current, their current career pathway system. But we know that stakeholder engagement isn't just a one-time deal, right? So we can't ask students to respond to a survey and be good with it. But that's where I think a lot of the actual local implementation is critical to continued engagement of those stakeholders. So earlier we talked about career pathways are expected to have advisory boards. And on those advisory boards, we certainly have teachers and business and industry and community organization partners and parents, but students should also be sitting at those advisory boards, and they should have a clearly articulated role. But that role often is to discuss the not only the things that they should be learning, but maybe some of the difficulties, or giving that student voice to confusion, or also providing business and industry with a student perspective of things that are enjoyable to them when they go on some sort of experiential learning, like a field trip or a job shadow or maybe an internship. So to add, I think you have to have students sitting around the table at those advisory board meetings at the local level as well.
I absolutely agree. Great point.
Just two more quick things, and I know Ellen wants to chime in, but two more quick things for you are, it's about the survey, and it's actually a question that I had too, but Bill asked it about the results. How are you going to make the results public? Will people be able to access them? What are you going to do with the results? Have you thought about that?
We are starting to think about that now. So we are really fortunate that that Cheney and crew at the College and Career Readiness and Success Center are going to help us unpack the results. We've got a number of quantitative measures in that survey, but also lots of opportunities for people to provide written responses. So trying to synthesize all of that data and drive policy based on the feedback folks are providing is a really daunting task. So we're excited to have some assistance in synthesizing and analyzing that data. And in terms of sharing the results, we do have every intent of sharing our results. This is part, as both Cheney and I mentioned, of our New Skills for Youth grant needs assessment. So we will be sharing out the results of that as part of the Phase 2 grant application, and sharing with our stakeholders, because I do think it's important. You know, we're doing this survey and we're getting feedback from all these stakeholders, but one of the things that is, I think, going to be really interesting is to be able to share with business people the feedback that we hear from students, or the excuse me, share with teachers what we're hearing from business people, and help all of our stakeholders hear what each other, what the other groups are saying, and how they can sort of band together to serve each other better and serve our students better.
Well, and one last one. What content, or which the question is what ad content have you seen to be most effective? And I know we talked to you a little bit about this yesterday, but would you say your Facebook ad have been the most effective in terms of getting feedback, or what do you think in terms of what you all are doing?
We've definitely had the most success with Facebook ads, and you know, we do have someone in-house who does graphic design and is very adept in marketing. So we have a great picture and some copy that goes with that ad. But we've had a lot of success getting engagements with the Facebook ad. The other thing the department has had success with that I didn't mention before is just regular engagement with our social media pages at the Ohio Department of Education. So we have a blog that we sort of, you know, provide short little pieces of information about what's going on in education in Ohio, share those out through our social media, and we're able to get a lot of engagement that way in general. But social media is a huge driver, both paid and unpaid, in terms of being able to engage folks in Ohio.
Great, thanks. Ellen, I think you wanted to highlight a little bit more about what the CCRS Center did work in Ohio.
I did, yeah,
Okay.
Thank you. So thank you, Emily, for sharing the work that we've done in collaboration with you all. And I just wanted to note that the work that we did with Ohio in terms of identifying existing surveys and survey items for different types of stakeholders, we are working on making that a more broadly available resource. So we are, in the next couple of weeks, a week and a half, we will be finalizing that resource and adding it to our website, the resource that identifies those survey items, and then also just some general guidance around sound survey design. And so that will be part of the materials that we'll actually be highlighting on our second webinar, the one that will be happening on the 19th. So I just wanted to make that plug that we'll talk about it a little bit more, and it will be available for everyone on the call and broader than this call. So thank you.
Thanks. So now I think we're gonna take some time and go to one more polling question, and we'll spend about 10 minutes with Catherine to talk to us more about resources that can help move this work forward. So the polling question is up. The question is, what are the biggest barriers to engaging key stakeholders? So think about that. Based on everything that was just shared with you, think about what are some of the biggest barriers to your career pathways work. Do the poll, and then we'll look at the results, and then Catherine will move us forward. Do one more minute, and then we will look at the results. Okay, if we could look at the results, please. There we are. So it looks like one of the biggest barriers is actually engaging them in the career pathways work throughout more consistently is my guess. And then collaborating to develop goals and clarifying the roles. And these are all things that I think we can help you with. And I think some of the resources that Catherine's going to share with you really address some of these key points. And I think they're obviously common barriers for all states in terms of continuing to engage stakeholders, as well as really working together to clarify the roles and goals for the programs. So Catherine, would you like to share some resources with them, please?
I would. Thank you, Beth. And it's interesting to see the results of the poll, because I do agree. I think that the resources that we're going to share can really help address some of these questions. All right. So I'm going to share just briefly some resources from the CCRS Center, as well as some other organizations that can really help you in thinking about how to engage stakeholders. So the first is our Career Pathways module that's developed by us at the College Career Readiness and Success Center. So it includes a couple different pieces. It has a facilitator's guide, it has handouts and supplementary resources that can support both the facilitator and the participants who are going through this design process. It also has some slides that can be built out by the facilitator to be used in meetings and presentations. And there are a lot of resources packed into these modules. They're really designed to help states or districts in either updating their career pathway system or designing one from scratch. So the person who is leading this work could be somebody who's at the State Department of Education. They could be a point person. They could be a point person within a district. But there are a lot of other stakeholders who might be involved in facilitating this work. So that could be industry representatives, post-secondary partners like someone at a community college, representatives from career and tech ed, and then of course there are a number of other stakeholders who might want to be involved at different points of the process, so community-based organizations, parents, representatives from adult education, state and local policymakers, and those who are in workforce development. So these resources, I think, are really helpful because they acknowledge all of the different roles that all of those different types of stakeholders might take in the process. So here we actually have a little example of what these materials look like in the modules. So on the left here we have an example of one of the pages in the module. You can see that it has these icons and call-out boxes so that it's really easy to read and navigate. And then here on the right we have an example of one of the visual representations that is included that can help the facilitator visualize and see, well, what are these activities supposed to look like? We really try to provide clarification around that. One other thing that I want to note here is that the modules don't necessarily say, this is the career pathway system that you should implement. This is exactly what it looks like. Rather, it provides a process for developing or updating a career pathway system from start to finish. And we think that that can be really helpful because, a lot of states already do have some career pathways already there, and so having that process for updating it and engaging stakeholders can be really helpful. So today we're going to focus on the first chapter in the Career Pathways module, the focus on engaging key stakeholders and defining goals. The other 3 chapters of the Career Pathways module, which we will talk about in the subsequent series in this webinar, are mapping policies, programs, and industries, designing the actual Career Pathways framework, and managing the implementation and continuous improvement. So chapter 1. The goal of this chapter is really to identify the key stakeholders that should be involved in this work, and also to define the goals of the career pathway system. Now, I know in the poll many of you said that you did not select that identifying the right stakeholders was your challenge. Rather, it was thinking about how to engage them in the process. So I do want to note that this chapter also includes some activities around that. So how to hold a kickoff meeting to bring everyone together, how to clarify the different stakeholder roles and responsibilities throughout the process, how to identify their various commitments, and how to build their knowledge about the actual career pathway system and what are the common elements. So we want to pull out some resources that we think are really helpful from this chapter. We already talked about a number of the stakeholders that you might want to have engaged in this work. You might want to also, when you're identifying stakeholders, consider what sectors of people you might want to have involved. So we typically think of K-12, post-secondary, career and tech ed, adult education, industry, and workforce. There are also community-based organizations that might be really helpful at a local level, as well as policymakers. Now, those are very diverse groups, and so when you're thinking about how to engage them, you might want to think about how you want them to be involved and what role you want them to play. So this handout 1A from the modules provides these different descriptors that we think are really helpful. So we have champion, connector, decision maker, and doer. We think of the champion as someone who can advocate for the work and help share information about it broadly. A connector also helps share information, but they also help connect people to the work and get people engaged, either at the beginning or at various stages. The decision maker is, of course, somebody who helps push the work forward. They might review key documents at certain points and, of course, make key decisions. And then finally, the doer is going to be somebody who's really doing the lion's share of the work, coordinating meetings, getting people together, making sure that the right information is being pulled together. So when you're thinking about which stakeholders you want to involve, think about who might be most appropriate for these different roles. So for instance, if you have a state legislature involved who's a real champion of the work, you probably want to have them out there getting people engaged and sharing messages. It might be somebody who is SEA staff who might be best suited to be in that position of the doer, who's really helping to get the work done. Handout 1A also has some bits about what stage of the process stakeholders will be involved in. So this is just one sample of what's included in that handout, but you might think about what they want to do. So for instance, somebody from the SEA might be really well positioned to handle some of the process and logistics, whereas you might think about how your industry representatives and those who are involved in workforce can help build capacity and knowledge around what best practices are around career pathways. Some other handouts that are in this chapter that we think are really helpful. Handout 1B gives an overview of what Career Pathways 101 look like. This is a great way for how when stakeholders come together in that kickoff meeting, they can establish a common understanding of what a career pathway system is, but they can also have a discussion and identify what their priorities are for this work. You can see one of those visual representations here on the slide. thinking about what are the priorities for everyone in the room and moving the work forward. That's a great way of kind of keeping your work in scope as the project progresses. We want to share just a couple of other resources. So our colleagues at the GTL Center developed this stakeholder engagement guide as part of their work to support equitable access. It provides some really good tips on what types of formats are best for what size and type of convenings you might want to hold. It also provides some guidance on different communication tactics that can be good for different groups. Our colleagues at CCSSO recently released the Stakeholder Engagement Guide. It provides a lot of best practices about stakeholder engagement in general. I think it's also really interesting. It provides a lot of guiding questions for a facilitator on how to best design these convenings or their communications with stakeholders. The Reform Support Network put together this guidance on engaging educators. It's really interesting. It outlines the roles that stakeholders take from when they first get involved and maybe don't know a lot about an initiative or a project to when they've been involved for a long time and have gotten really deeply engaged in the process. And then finally, this resource by IDEA, it's actually developed entirely by stakeholders themselves, which is really cool. And it involves a lot of tips and reflections on how to interact effectively with stakeholders, and I think importantly, how to build trust with stakeholders throughout the process. And so I hope those are helpful. And with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Beth.
Thank you, Catherine. So we have a few minutes. I mean, we built in questions in the middle, but I haven't seen any other questions in the question box. But this is a quick opportunity to ask any questions that you'd like of the presenters in terms of the resources and or the concept of stakeholder engagement. We'll give a couple minutes and then we'll close out the webinar. Ellen, Kelly is asking about an overview of the CCRS, what we can do and can't, those types of things.
Sorry, you jumped out a little bit, so I think I heard that the question is about the CCRS Center and the types of support that we can provide. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Great. Yep, so the CCRS Center, we are charged with supporting state education agencies and their regional comp center liaisons in their implementation of college and career work. So our work mostly focuses with at the SEA level, but our resources and some general support or general technical assistance is applicable to everybody. So you can use our materials for free. They're on our website, which we'll share the website as well. But the deeper TA that we engage in is mostly at the SEA level. And I know that there was another question, I think, for Cheney about stakeholder buy-in, and I just want to make sure that he has a chance to respond to that one as well.
Yes. No, it was just the concept in looking at everybody's questions, there was an understanding of how do you get buy-in from the different stakeholders.
Yeah, I think stakeholder buy-in is an interesting question, but it's certainly an important question that we have to ask. So when we think about our experiences in education, we think about the perspective of business and industry. Historically, folks who have been approached by schools or school systems and asked for their assistance, I think it's often been in the situation of asking for money to support an initiative. So donating money to send students on a trip, purchasing an ad that's going into a calendar, maybe donating to the building of a field house for an athletic team or something like that. And I think that one of the best ways to get stakeholder buy-in is from the very beginning, be very explicit that you're asking for two things from stakeholders, their time and their talent, but that and also call out you're not asking for money. Because I think that's one of the challenges to engaging stakeholders is this common myth that stakeholder engagement means you must give money or you must be donating money, and that's incorrect. So focus on the time and talent.
Thank you. Ellen, I think you're ready to close us out. Isn't it 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock?
I am, yes, thank you. That hour went by very fast, and thank you to all the presenters who took time to present today and all the participants who stayed on for the whole hour. I just wanted to close out today by, again, thanking you all and highlighting our next webinar, which is part of this series, which will be taking place on Tuesday, July 19th. And this webinar will focus more on understanding the state context for designing a career pathway system. And as I mentioned earlier, so thinking about what it looks like at the local implementation level, as well as sharing some resources and some strategies around how to analyze labor market needs to make sure that career pathway systems are aligned to the market needs. And so you have our website here as well, ccrscenter.org, and all of the resources that we discussed today are on our website, and we look forward to hearing from you all and listening to you all in the next webinar. So thank you, everyone. The one thing, the feedback survey will pop up as we close out this webinar series, so please just take a couple of minutes and respond to the survey. We do use that information both to enhance your experience on the webinar, but also to help inform our work and develop resources that would be useful to the field. So thank you again, and looking forward to talking with you all soon.